There's a rule every infantry unit understands instinctively, even if nobody ever actually says it out loud, in training or in the field. The enemy is the danger. Your own side is safety. Friendly positions mean cover, resupply, reinforcement, artillery, and air support that's aimed at the people trying to kill you rather than at you. The one direction on the battlefield you're never supposed to have to worry about. Soldiers build their entire understanding of survival around this basic division. Enemy fire is expected, planned for, trained against, relentlessly from the first day of basic training onward. Friendly fire is, by definition, the thing that isn't supposed to happen, the failure of the entire system meant to protect you rather than a natural consequence of combat itself. The one category of danger that no amount of personal skill or courage can fully guard against. This rule holds across virtually every army, every era, every conflict, fought with coordinated air and ground forces. It's why coordination between infantry and air support is treated with such extraordinary care in every modern military. It's why forward air controllers exist specifically to prevent exactly this kind of mistake, radioing precise coordinates and target confirmations back and forth in the middle of active combat. It's why the entire structure of modern combined arms warfare is built around ensuring that the aircraft and artillery meant to support ground troops actually land their fire on the enemy rather than on the men they're supposed to be protecting. And yet, across every war fought with this kind of coordination, the mistake still happens, rare, but never fully eliminated, a known and documented risk that every unit relying on close air support quietly accepts as part of the danger of modern warfare, a danger that exists precisely because war is chaotic, communication under fire is imperfect, and the difference between friend and enemy from several thousand feet up, moving at speed, is sometimes far less obvious than it should be. On September 29, 1952, on a hill in Korea that barely registers as a footnote in most general histories of the war, that rule gets tested in a way almost no unit in this entire conflict experiences in quite the same sequence. A Greek battalion is about to capture a position from Chinese forces, defend it through 5 separate counterattacks in a single 4-hour stretch without breaking, and then watch it slip away anyway. Not because the enemy they'd just beaten 5 times in a row finally broke through, because the very air support meant to protect them struck the wrong target at the worst possible moment. By September 1952, the Sparta Battalion has been in Korea for roughly 22 months, and the unit that fights this specific engagement is not the same green formation that arrived at Busan back in December 1950. Nearly 2 years is a long time for any single unit to remain committed to a foreign war. Long enough for the character of a battalion to change considerably even as its name and its reputation stay consistent. Men rotate home, wounded and rested replacements arrive, and command itself passes through several hands over that stretch, each new officer inheriting both the battalion's hard-earned reputation and the responsibility of living up to it. The battalion's founding commander, Lieutenant Colonel Dionysios Arbouzis, led the unit through its arrival and its earliest engagements, establishing the operational discipline and reputation for reliability that would carry through the entire deployment. By the time of Denori Hill, command has passed through several officers, part of the normal rotation any unit fighting this long in a foreign war experiences, a process no different in principle from what any long-serving military formation goes through, regardless of nationality. The officer in command at Daenori Hill is Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Tamvakas, leading a battalion whose core officer corps, selected originally for fluency in English rather than seniority or connections, remains largely experienced across the deployment. Many of them veterans of the Second World War and the Greek Civil War, a conflict that had ended in October 1949, roughly 8 months before Korea began. A conflict that had trained an entire generation of Greek officers in exactly the kind of mountainous, hill-to-hill combat this specific engagement is about to demand of them again. That experience matters enormously in a war like Korea, where much of the fighting by 1952 has come to resemble the static, positional combat of an earlier era, far more than the fast-moving mechanized warfare most Western militaries had trained for since the end of the Second World War. The unit itself has grown over the course of its deployment. From its original 849 volunteers pulled from Greece's 1st, 8th, and 9th Infantry Divisions, all of them men who chose to volunteer for a war being fought on the other side of the planet. The battalion expands to just over 1,000 men following reinforcements that arrive in August of 1951, a reflection both of combat losses needing replacement across the deployment and of a battalion that's proven valuable enough to the American command structure to warrant strengthening rather than simply being maintained at its original size or gradually rotated out entirely. In November 1951, the battalion transfers from the United States 1st Cavalry Division, which it had served under since arriving in Korea, to the United States 3rd Infantry Division, as the 1st Cavalry prepares to leave the theater for Japan. By September 1952, this is the division the battalion now serves under, a new set of American commanders and staff officers who inherit, along with the operational responsibility for this section of the front, a Greek battalion whose combat record precedes it into every new assignment. The battalion arrives at this point in its deployment with a string of engagements already behind it that have built its reputation across nearly the entire length of the Korean front. Hill 381 in January 1951, where the battalion held against a Chinese force outnumbering them roughly 3.5 to 1 in freezing winter conditions. Their first real combat test in Korea, fought in temperatures that dropped well below freezing against an enemy pressing a determined night assault. Hill 489 in February. Hill 326 in March. Fighting near an area called Churadong through the summer months. Scotch Hill, formerly known as Hill 313, in early October 1951. An uphill assault into fortified Chinese positions that costs the battalion real casualties but earns them their first U.S. Presidential Unit citation, one of the highest collective honors the United States military can bestow on a foreign unit. Each of these actions adds another layer to a pattern. The Americans supervising this sector of the front have started to recognize clearly and rely on. Wherever the Sparta Battalion is sent, the position tends to be held or taken, regardless of what it costs to accomplish, regardless of the numbers stacked against them on any given night, and regardless of which specific officer happens to be in command at the time. By late September 1952, the broader shape of the Korean War has settled firmly into the static, positional character that will define its final year, right up until the armistice in July 1953. Contested hills change hands in limited operations designed to improve defensive lines rather than achieve any dramatic strategic breakthrough, a war increasingly fought hill by hill, outpost by outpost, each individual action small in scale compared to the sweeping campaigns of the war's first year, but demanding just as much of the men actually fighting them, if not more, given how repetitive and exhausting this particular style of warfare tends to become over months of continuous exposure to it. The specific objective is a position known as Denori Hill, held by Chinese Communist forces who have had considerable time to dig in and fortify their defenses, building the kind of prepared positions that make any assault against them a genuinely costly proposition, regardless of which side is attacking. Denori Hill, roughly 200 meters away, is the Greek battalion's own start line for the assault, the position they'll be attacking from, rather than a second enemy stronghold, a detail worth being precise about since the terrain itself, not just the enemy's positions, shapes everything about how this engagement is about to unfold. The plan is straightforward on paper, in exactly the way most of these hill battles are straightforward on paper by this stage of the war. Capture Denori. Hold it. Deny the Chinese the tactical advantage, the elevation and observation the hill provides over the surrounding terrain. What isn't written into any operational plan is how violently and how immediately the Chinese Communist Army is about to respond to losing this specific piece of ground, or the mistake that's going to nearly cost the Greek battalion the position anyway, after they've already proven, repeatedly, that they can hold it against everything the enemy throws at them directly. At dawn on September 29th, 1952, the Sparta Battalion moves out from Denori Hill against Daenori Hill and captures it. It's a hard-fought action from the start, contested ground that doesn't simply fall into Greek hands without resistance. The Chinese defenders putting up exactly the kind of stubborn, prepared defense their fortified positions were built for. But by the time the sun is fully up over the hills of this sector, the position has changed hands. For a brief window, the battalion holds ground that belonged to the Chinese Communist Army just hours earlier, and in the immediate aftermath of any successful assault like this, there's usually at least some time to begin consolidating the position properly, digging in, establishing clear fields of fire, bringing up ammunition and supplies to sustain a defense against the counterattack. Every experienced soldier on that hill knows, from hard-won prior experience across nearly 2 years of fighting on this same peninsula, is very likely coming, and coming soon. That window doesn't stay open long here. The Chinese Communist Army, having just lost the hill, responds with something closer to immediate fury than a measured, deliberate counterattack. They begin their response almost as soon as the position falls, refusing to give the Greek battalion any real time to properly strengthen what they've just taken. This is a deliberate tactical choice on the Chinese side, one that reflects a broader, well-documented pattern across the Korean War of Chinese forces launching rapid counterattacks specifically to catch defenders before they can consolidate, exploiting the vulnerable window that exists between capturing a position and actually being fully ready to hold it against a serious, coordinated assault. It's a tactic built around speed and pressure rather than overwhelming firepower, a recognition that a newly captured position is almost always weaker than it will be even a few hours later, once the defenders have had time to properly organize. What follows over the next 4 hours is 5 separate Chinese assaults, wave after wave, thrown at the Greek positions with barely any meaningful gap between attacks. This isn't one sustained push that either succeeds or fails in a single continuous action. It's 5 distinct efforts to retake the hill, each one requiring the Greek defenders to weather an assault, deal with whatever damage and casualties it inflicts, and then immediately prepare for the next wave without any real opportunity to rest, reorganize ammunition stocks, or properly treat wounded men before the next attack begins rolling in. Picture what 4 hours of this actually looks like from inside the Greek positions on that hill. The first assault comes, and the battalion, still working to properly secure a position they've held for only a matter of hours, has to repel it using whatever defensive preparations they've managed to establish in the limited time available. Before there's any real time to assess damage or properly reorganize, the second assault begins, Chinese infantry pushing forward again through whatever cover the terrain offers, probing for any section of the Greek line that showed weakness during the first attack. Then the third assault follows, and by this point, the physical and mental toll of this kind of repeated, sustained combat starts to become its own separate enemy, distinct from the Chinese soldiers actually attacking the position. The exhaustion of continuous alertness across hours with no real pause. The dwindling ammunition that no resupply can reach quickly enough during an ongoing engagement of this length. The accumulating list of wounded men who need care that simply isn't available in the middle of an active assault. Men who have to be tended to as best as possible in the same trenches and firing positions where the fighting itself is happening. The fourth assault arrives with the same intensity as the ones before it, and by now the battalion has been fighting continuously for the better part of 3 hours, holding a position they'd captured that same morning, against an enemy that shows no sign of accepting that the hill is genuinely lost. This kind of engagement is attrition in its purest form, a test not of whether the battalion can win one decisive engagement through some singular moment of heroism, but of whether they can simply keep functioning, keep fighting effectively, assault after assault, without the fatigue and accumulating casualties eventually breaking their ability to hold the line at all. The Sparta Battalion holds through all 5. Each Chinese assault is repelled in turn. Each attempt by the enemy to retake Denori Hill fails against a Greek defense that, despite having captured this position only hours earlier and having had almost no time to properly prepare for what was coming, simply does not break under the accumulated pressure of 4 continuous hours of combat. It doesn't break from the enemy. It breaks from somewhere else entirely, in a way that none of the exhausted men fighting through those 5 assaults could have anticipated or trained for, no matter how experienced or battle-hardened they already were by this stage of the war. During the 5th Chinese attack, at what should be the culminating moment of a defense that's already succeeded 4 times over against everything the enemy has thrown at it, the position is struck by a mistaken bombing run from a United Nations aircraft. Friendly air support, meant to be reinforcing the defense of Daenori Hill, instead strikes the very hill the Greek battalion is holding. The damage inflicted is severe enough that, after successfully repelling 5 direct Chinese assaults across 4 continuous hours of exhausting, close-range fighting, the battalion is forced to retreat from a position they never actually lost to the enemy at all. Sit with what that actually means for the men who just spent 4 hours fighting off wave after wave of Chinese infantry who held their ground through everything a determined, immediate, repeated enemy counterattack could throw at them. They don't lose Denori Hill because the Chinese Communist Army finally breaks through their defenses after 5 tries. They lose it because their own side's aircraft, flying in specifically to help them, strikes the wrong target at the worst possible moment in the entire engagement. The story doesn't end with that retreat, though it doesn't resolve as quickly or as cleanly as it might seem. After pulling back and re-equipping, the Spartan battalion returns to the hill, recapturing Denori at dawn the following day, or by some accounts in a night assault around 2 in the morning. Even that recapture doesn't hold as the final word. The battalion is forced to retreat from the position again in the days that follow, and the sector is eventually handed over to South Korea's own 1st Infantry Division. The full story of Denori Hill isn't one clean victory. It's a hill that changes hands repeatedly, fought over and lost and retaken across the shifting, grinding reality of positional warfare in the final year of the Korean War. A reality far messier and more human than any single triumphant retelling could capture. Someone found this video, and now you know something most people don't. Subscribe so the next person finds it too. That's genuinely how stories like this survive long enough to reach the people who'd actually want to hear them. Denori Hill becomes one more entry in a growing pattern that follows the Sparta Battalion through 1952 and into 1953. A pattern well established among the American units the battalion serves alongside by this point. Hill 381, Hill 489, Hill 326, Scotch Hill, now Daenori Hill. Each engagement adds to a reputation that continues drawing serious, sustained attention from the American command structure, officers who have by now watched this specific battalion perform under conditions that have broken far larger, better-resourced units elsewhere along the Korean front. The broader pattern of Chinese offensive tactics across this period of the war relies heavily on exactly this kind of immediate, overwhelming counterattack, hitting a newly captured position again and again before the defenders have any real chance to properly prepare. That the Sparta Battalion survives 5 of these assaults within 4 hours and then loses the position not to the enemy but to a mistaken strike from their own side's aircraft, only to keep contesting the hill in the days that follow rather than simply abandoning the objective, becomes part of what cements the battalion's broader reputation for the remainder of the war. It's not simply that they can win a single battle through determination or skill. It's that setbacks, even setbacks as strange and demoralizing as losing ground to friendly fire after successfully defending it from the actual enemy, don't end their willingness to keep contesting the same objective. This pattern continues through the rest of the battalion's deployment. Through 1953, the unit fights at Hills 438, 420, 495, and 492. In June of that year, under Lieutenant Colonel Georgios Koumanakos, who commands the battalion from January through July 1953, Company P plays a role in the defense of Outpost Harry alongside American units from the 15th Infantry Regiment and the 65th Infantry Regiment, an action late in the war that results in the first instance in U.S. military history of so many separate units receiving a Presidential Unit Citation for a single shared mission. The Sparta Battalion goes on to earn 2 U.S. Presidential Unit Citations and a Republic of Korea Presidential Unit Citation across its full deployment in Korea, becoming, by the American military's own assessment at the time, one of the most highly decorated infantry battalions of the entire war, regardless of the nationality of the unit being measured against it. Denori Hill isn't the single engagement that earns the headline citation. Scotch Hill holds that particular distinction, recognized formally in February 1952. But Denori Hill stands as a clear demonstration of the same underlying quality that earned those larger honors. A battalion that keeps fighting, keeps adapting, and keeps returning to contest ground it's been ordered to hold, even when the setback that costs them that ground comes from a direction no soldier is ever fully trained to expect or prepare for, and even when the fighting for a single hill stretches across days rather than resolving in one clean, decisive moment. The battalion's presence in Korea extends far beyond the armistice itself, expanded further to 2,163 men in January 1954. The Greek contingent remains in Korea for years after the fighting formally ends, not finally departing until 1955, and even then, leaving behind a small representative section that stays until 1958. Across the entire commitment, close to 5,000 Greek soldiers serve during the period of active combat alone, drawn from a country that, measured against its own population and resources still recovering from its own civil war, had genuinely less to spare for a distant conflict than almost any other nation that answered the United Nations' original call for assistance in Korea. What happened on September 29, 1952, rarely appears in general popular accounts of the Korean War, even accounts that cover the broader Greek contribution to the conflict in reasonable depth. It survives mostly in official Korean Veterans Affairs records and detailed unit histories, the kind of granular tactical detail that easily disappears from popular memory of a war that remains, even now, significantly undertold in most English-language historical writing and media. If you believe stories like this deserve more than the 20 seconds most channels would give them before moving on to something else, subscribe. That belief is basically this entire channel's reason for existing, and there's a considerable amount more sitting in these archives, verified and waiting for someone to actually tell them properly. Thank you for giving Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Tamvakis and the Sparta Battalion's story at Denori Hill the attention it genuinely earned. They contested that ground across days, against two very different kinds of danger, one from an enemy determined to take it back by force across 5 separate assaults, and one from their own side's mistake in the chaos of trying to help them keep what they'd already won. Both of those are worth remembering properly, not smoothed over into a cleaner story than what actually happened.